Jackson stared at the cargo manifest with weary eyes that had seen too much death and too many alien worlds. The dim blue light of his ship's cabin, the Wanderer, cast long shadows across his unshaven face. 7 years as a combat medic during the Interplanetary War, and now 3 years as a smuggler just to keep his ship flying. This wasn't the life he'd imagined when he'd enlisted to save lives across the stars. The console beeped. Another message from Harkin's thugs. He didn't need to read it to know what it said. Deliver the shipment or face consequences. The debt collector's creativity with threats had become almost artistic. Navigation systems online. Approaching Omega Station in 20 minutes. Announced the ship's AI in its mechanical feminine voice. Jackson nodded, strapping his blaster to his thigh. Omega Station wasn't a place for the unarmed or the unwary. A hub for everything illegal in this sector of space, it operated under minimal Imperial oversight, which made it perfect for the types of deals that kept people like Jackson afloat, and people like Harkin rich. The station loomed ahead, a massive construction of metal and lights against the backdrop of a gas giant. Omega's multiple docking rings rotated slowly, creating the illusion of a mechanical beast breathing in the void. Docking sequence initiated, the AI announced as the Wanderer slid into its assigned berth. Jackson felt the familiar clunk of the docking clamps engaging. He took a deep breath, adjusted his jacket to conceal his medkit, and moved toward the airlock. Omega Station's central hub was a chaotic mix of species, smells, and sounds. Security drones hovered above, their red scanning beams sweeping the crowds in perpetual vigilance that somehow never quite reached the darkened corners where the real business happened. Jackson, a familiar voice called. He turned to see Rena pushing through the crowd. Her cybernetic eye gleamed orange against her blue skin. Former military, like him, now making her living in the shadowy spaces between legal and lethal. "You're late," she said, falling in a step beside him. "Had to dodge an Imperial patrol near the Vegas sector," he replied. "Got your message about a high-paying shipment." "What's the cargo?" Rena handed him a small data chip. "Details are here. Pickup is at Dock 17, delivery coordinates included. The pay is triple your usual rate." Jackson's eyebrows raised. "Triple? What am I hauling, Rena? Weapons?" "Restricted biotech." Rena shook her head. "Client was very specific. No questions. But they assure me it's not bombs or viruses. Just needs to be moved quickly and quietly." "That's what concerns me," Jackson muttered, pocketing the chip. "Last time something needed moving quickly and quietly, I spent 2 weeks picking plasma burns out of my hull." "Your smuggling permit expires in 3 hours," Rena reminded him, ignoring his complaint. "Security's been doubling random checks this month. I'd get moving if I were you." Jackson nodded. Rena was right, as always. "If I end up in an Imperial prison, I'm giving them your name first," he said with a grim smile. Rena's laugh followed him as he made his way to Dock 17. The cargo was smaller than he expected. 3 sealed containers, each about the size of a human coffin. Standard smuggler procedure would be to load them and go, no questions asked. But something about this didn't sit right with Jackson. Once back aboard the Wanderer, with the cargo secured in the hold, Jackson initiated departure protocols. As the ship disengaged from the station, he instructed the AI to set course for the delivery coordinates, then returned to the cargo hold. The containers were unmarked, sealed with high-grade security locks. Military grade, in fact. Jackson's suspicions deepened. He ran a scanner over the first 2 containers, synthetic fabrics and rare minerals, nothing unusual. But the 3rd container scan came back scrambled. "Biological interference," he muttered. Living cargo was strictly prohibited without special permits, permits that cost more than a ship was worth. Against his better judgment, Jackson overrode the security lock. The container hissed open, cold vapor spilling out across the floor. Inside lay a creature unlike anything Jackson had seen before. Similar in shape to an earth lion, but larger, with iridescent scales instead of fur. Its body was predominantly white, with swirling patterns of deep crimson that seemed to pulse with their own light. Around its neck was a collar of what looked like liquid metal, embedded with stones that glowed with an inner fire. The creature's breathing was labored, its scales dull. Even to Jackson's eyes, trained on dozens of alien species during the war, this creature was clearly dying. "What the hell have I gotten myself into?" he whispered. The creature's eyes opened. Vibrant violet irises focused on him with an intelligence that made him step back. It made a low, keening sound that seemed to reverberate not just in his ears, but somewhere deep in his mind. Jackson's medical scanner revealed the problem immediately: poison spreading rapidly through its system. Without treatment, the creature would die within hours. The doctor in him, the part he'd tried to bury under smuggled cargo and false identities, stirred to life. Before he could second-guess himself, Jackson was reaching for his medkit, pulling out synthesizers and antitoxins. "I don't know what you are," he murmured to the creature, "but I'm not watching you die if I can help it." The ship's emergency alert blared, interrupting his work. "Proximity alert," the AI announced. "Royal Azuri vessel approaching. They're broadcasting on all frequencies." The view screen activated without his command. A stern-faced humanoid with silver-blue skin and those same crimson markings as the creature stared back at him. She wore an elaborate uniform with insignia that Jackson didn't recognize. "Unidentified vessel. This is Commander Thora of the Royal Azuri Guard. You are in possession of sacred property of Her Majesty Queen Keldara. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded, or we will open fire." Jackson cut the transmission. AI, full power to engines. Evasive pattern delta. "Compliance may be advisable," the AI suggested calmly. "The Azuri vessel outguns us 3-1. Jackson ignored the warning, returning his attention to the creature. Its eyes followed his movements as he prepared a stimulant that might counteract the poison. "I don't know who you belong to," he told it as he worked, "but right now, you're my patient, and I don't surrender my patience." The creature's front paw moved weakly, touching his hand. Jackson felt a strange sensation, like someone was gently probing at the edges of his consciousness. "Warning, Azuri vessel has deployed tractor beam," the AI announced. Jackson cursed, feeling the ship shudder as the powerful beam locked onto the Wanderer. He injected the stimulant into the creature's neck, watching as its breathing steadied slightly. "At least I bought you some time," he told it. The airlock alarm sounded. They were being boarded. Jackson drew his blaster, positioning himself between the cargo hold door and the creature. He might be a smuggler now, but he still remembered his oath as a medic. First, do no harm, but second, protect your patient at all costs. The cargo hold door slid open. Commander Thora stood there, flanked by 4 guards, all armed with weapons that made Jackson's blaster look like a child's toy. "Step away from the Lumera," Thora ordered, her voice steel. Jackson didn't move. "The Lumera is poisoned. I'm treating it." "Him," Thora corrected. "And this is no simple beast. This is Lumera, sacred companion to Queen Keldara. His disappearance has thrown our entire homeworld into chaos." Before Jackson could respond, the guards parted, and a new figure entered the cargo hold. She was tall, with the same silver-blue skin as the others, but her crimson markings were more elaborate, swirling across her face like living calligraphy. Her eyes were the same vibrant violet as the creature's, the Lumerous. She wore a flowing gown that seemed to shift colors with each movement, and a circlet of the same liquid metal as the Lumera's collar rested on her brow. "I am Keldara," she announced, her voice carrying a strange musical quality. "Queen of the Azuri and bonded to Lumera." The creature, Lumera, raised his head at the sound of her voice, making a soft chirping noise. Keldara moved past Jackson as if he wasn't there, kneeling beside Lumera. Her hand hovered over the creature's flank, and Jackson saw her markings pulse in time with Lumera's. "He's been poisoned," she confirmed, looking up at Jackson with eyes that suddenly seemed to pierce straight through him. "And you have been treating him." Jackson nodded cautiously. "Basic antitoxins. I was a combat medic." "You saved his life," Keldara interrupted. Her gaze was evaluating now, taking in every detail of his appearance. "Do you know what that means, human? That I'm not getting paid for this shipment?" Jackson ventured. The ghost of a smile touched Keldara's lips, quickly replaced by regal seriousness. It means that according to our most sacred laws, you are now bound to the royal house of Azuri. The savior of a queen's Lumira must become royal consort. Jackson stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When none came, he looked to Commander Thora, who was watching him with something between suspicion and fascination. You're serious, he finally managed. The law of the Lumira is absolute, Keldara stated. I cannot change it even if I wish to. You will return with us to Azura. Jackson felt the familiar sensation of his life spinning wildly out of control. One moment he was a smuggler with a debt problem. The next he was apparently engaged to an alien queen because he'd followed his medical instincts. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he began, but Commander Thora stepped forward. There is no misunderstanding. The law is clear. You will come with us, willingly or not. Your ship will be secured and brought alongside, Keldara added, her tone softer but no less commanding. Commander Thora, prepare for departure to Azura. As the guards surrounded him, Jackson looked back at Lumira. The creature's condition was stabilizing, but he still needed care. Whatever bizarre situation Jackson had landed himself in, abandoning a patient wasn't an option. I'll continue treating him, Jackson said, holstering his blaster. But I want it noted that I'm cooperating under protest. Keldara's eyes met his again, and this time he could have sworn he saw amusement there. Noted, human. What is your name? Jackson. Just Jackson. Very well, just Jackson, she replied. Welcome to the royal house of Azuri. For better or worse, your fate is now bound to ours. As they led him from the cargo hold, Jackson couldn't help thinking that his debt to Harkin might be the least of his problems now. The journey to Azura took place aboard the royal vessel, a massive ship that made the Wanderer look like little more than a shuttle. Jackson was escorted to private quarters that were more luxurious than anything he'd experienced since before the war, but the armed guards outside his door made it clear this was a gilded cage. Keldara allowed him to continue treating Lumira, who was kept in a special chamber adjacent to his quarters. The creature was recovering slowly but steadily, and Jackson found himself drawn to the intelligence in those violet eyes. On the third day, Keldara visited him as he was checking Lumira's vitals. He's improving, Jackson reported, not looking up from his scanner. The poison is nearly neutralized, but he'll need time to regain his strength. We have you to thank for that, Keldara said, moving to stand beside him. Up close, without the formality of their first meeting, Jackson noticed details he'd missed before. The delicate structure of her face, the subtle variations in her silver-blue skin, the way her markings seemed to shift slightly with her emotions. I was just doing my job, Jackson replied. The job I was trained for, anyway, not the one I ended up with. And yet, here you are, Keldara observed. A human smuggler who risked his life to save a creature he didn't know, from a world he'd never heard of. Jackson shrugged. Old habits. You still haven't accepted your situation, have you? She asked. Jackson straightened, facing her directly. With all due respect, Your Majesty, I don't accept being forced into marriage by alien laws I didn't know existed until 3 days ago. Consort, she corrected. Not marriage as humans understand it. And the law exists whether you knew of it or not. Can't you just change it? Jackson suggested. You're the queen. Keldara's expression grew serious. Our laws are bound to our biology, our history, our very survival as a species. The law of the Lumira is not a mere tradition. It is the foundation of our continued existence. Jackson ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Look, I'm glad I saved him. I really am. But I can't stay here. I have obligations elsewhere. Debts to a crime lord named Harkin, if I understand correctly, Keldara replied calmly. Jackson stared at her. You've been investigating me. Of course. You are to be royal consort. I never agreed to that. And yet, here we are, Keldara repeated, her tone final. We will arrive at Azura tomorrow. I suggest you prepare yourself. The royal court will not be as understanding as I have been. As she turned to leave, Jackson called after her. What happens if I refuse? If I just leave? Keldara paused at the doorway, her expression unreadable. Then the bond between Lumira and I will weaken. Eventually, we will both fade. And without a queen, Azura will fall into civil war. She met his eyes. Is that what you want, Jackson? More death? More war? Without waiting for his answer, she departed, leaving Jackson alone with Lumira and the weight of a responsibility he never asked for. The Azuri royal vessel emerged from hyperspace near a planet that took Jackson's breath away. Azura was a swirl of deep blues and purples, with 3 moons of varying sizes orbiting in perfect harmony. As they descended through the atmosphere, he glimpsed sprawling cities that seemed to grow from the landscape rather than being built upon it, structures of crystal and metal that caught the light of the system's distant sun. The royal palace dominated the capital city, a magnificent structure of soaring spires and sweeping arches that reminded Jackson of the ancient cathedrals in images of old Earth. A delegation waited as their shuttle landed in the palace's central courtyard. Jackson, dressed in clothing provided by Keldara's staff, a fitted tunic and pants in deep blue with subtle accents that matched the crimson of Azuri royal markings, stood awkwardly beside Commander Thora. Remember, Thora murmured as the shuttle doors opened, speak only when spoken to. Address the council members as honored one. And try not to look so human. Jackson shot her a sideways glance. Not sure I can help that last part. Thora's lips twitched in what might have been almost a smile. Just try not to embarrass the queen. They descended the shuttle ramp. Keldara had gone ahead, and now stood with members of what Jackson assumed was the Royal Council. Lumira, much recovered but still moving carefully, padded alongside her. A tall, austere Azuri stepped forward from the council. His markings were elaborate but different from Keldara's, suggesting high rank but not royal blood. Your Majesty, he said, bowing to Keldara before turning cold eyes on Jackson. This is the human. This is Jackson, Keldara corrected. Saviour of Lumira and, by the sacred law, royal consort-elect. The Azuri's expression tightened. Velik, chief counselor of Azura. He introduced himself to Jackson with obvious reluctance. We have prepared for your arrival. The way he said it made Jackson suspect that those preparations might include an airlock and a convenient accident. The council will convene tomorrow to discuss the situation, Velik continued, addressing Keldara again. Until then, we have prepared quarters for the human. For royal consort-elect Jackson, Keldara corrected again, her voice carrying a note of steel despite its musical quality. And he will be housed in the royal wing, as is proper. Velik's markings pulsed with what Jackson was beginning to recognize as agitation. Your Majesty, that area is reserved for. I'm aware of our traditions, Chief Counselor, Keldara interrupted. Now, if you'll excuse us, Lumira and I must show Jackson to his quarters. She beckoned to Jackson, who followed, feeling Velik's glare boring into his back. As they walked through the palace corridors, passing Azuri courtiers who stopped to stare or bow, Jackson leaned closer to Keldara. Your chief counselor doesn't seem thrilled about my presence, he observed quietly. Velik represents the old guard, Keldara replied, her voice equally low. They believe in Azuri purity, no outside influences, no foreign alliances. And what do you believe? Jackson asked. Keldara glanced at him, those violet eyes unreadable. I believe in survival, Jackson. Sometimes that requires adaptation. They reached a set of ornate doors that slid open at their approach. Beyond was a suite that rivaled the size of the Wanderer's entire habitable space. A sitting area with views of the city below, a bedroom visible through an archway, and various other rooms extending from the central area. These will be your quarters, Keldara announced. The royal wing is connected. Lumira and I are through that passage. She indicated a doorway to the right. So I'm still a prisoner, just with a better view, Jackson noted, moving to the window to look out at the alien cityscape. You are a guest of honor, Keldara corrected. But yes, for now, it would be best if you remained within the royal wing. Not all Azuri would be as restrained as Velik in their disagreement with your presence. Jackson turned back to face her. You still haven't really explained why this law of the Lumira exists. Why saving a royal pet means I have to stay here for the rest of my life. Keldara's expression shifted, and for the first time, Jackson saw genuine emotion break through a regal facade, a mixture of frustration and something else, something almost like desperation. Lumira is not a pet, she said firmly. The bond between a ruler of Azura and their Lumira goes beyond mere companionship. Our life forces are intertwined. When you save Lumira, you also saved me. She moved to where Lumira sat watching them, her hand resting on his head. The creature's markings pulsed in rhythm with hers. The law of the Lumira was established by our ancestors to ensure the survival of our royal bloodline. The savior of a Lumira brings new strengths, new genetic material into our lineage. It prevents the stagnation that has been the downfall of many royal houses. Jackson's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Wait, you're saying this isn't just some honorary title? You actually expect me to father the next heir to the throne of Azura? Yes, eventually. Keldara's direct gaze challenged him to object. This is our way, Jackson. It has ensured our survival for thousands of years. Jackson ran a hand over his face, trying to process this new information. So I'm, what, a genetic donor? A breeding stud? Keldara's markings flashed with what might have been indignation. You would be royal consort, one of the highest positions in our society. Your children would rule Azura someday. This is not a punishment, Jackson. For many, it would be the highest honor imaginable. But I didn't ask for it, Jackson countered. I didn't agree to any of this. I just did what any decent medic would do. I saved a life. Keldara's expression softened slightly. And that is precisely why you were chosen. Not by me, not by the council, but by fate, by the laws that govern our existence. She stepped closer to him. I understand this is difficult for you to accept, but please try to understand our perspective as well. Before Jackson could respond, the door chime sounded. Commander Thora entered, her expression grim. Your Majesty, we've received word from our intelligence network. The attempt on Lumira's life. It was not isolated. There appears to be an organized effort to destabilize the throne. Keldara's posture stiffened. Do we know who is behind it? Not yet, Thora replied. But we have reason to believe there may be outside influence. Jackson, temporarily forgotten in the conversation, watched as Keldara's regal mask slipped further, revealing genuine concern. Increase security throughout the palace, she ordered, and assign additional guards to the royal wing. Thora nodded, then hesitated. What about the human? About Jackson? Keldara glanced at him, seemingly weighing options. Assign him a security detail as well. If he truly is to be royal consort, his safety is now a matter of state importance. As Thora left to carry out her orders, Jackson found himself alone again with Keldara and Lumira. The revelation that someone had deliberately poisoned Lumira, had tried to kill both the creature and, by extension, Keldara herself, cast the situation in a new light. The poison, he said slowly, it was sophisticated, military grade. Someone really wanted to make sure Lumira didn't survive. Keldara nodded. And now they know he has, and that you have arrived. Making me a target too, Jackson concluded. Perhaps, Keldara agreed. Which is why, regardless of your feelings about becoming royal consort, it would be safer for you to remain under our protection. Jackson laughed mirthlessly. So now I'm stuck here for my own protection? That's convenient. Nothing about this situation is convenient, Jackson, Keldara replied quietly. Not for you, and not for me, but it is the reality we face. She moved toward the door. Rest now. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. As she left, Lumira remained, watching Jackson with those intelligent violet eyes. After a moment, the creature approached, butting his massive head gently against Jackson's hand. Automatically, Jackson scratched behind Lumira's ears, eliciting a rumbling purr that seemed to vibrate through the floor. I don't suppose you could explain all this to me in a way that makes sense? Jackson asked the creature. Lumira blinked slowly, then settled down at Jackson's feet, clearly intending to stay. Jackson sighed, looking out at the alien sky, where 3 moons were now visible, hanging like jewels against the deepening purple. Well, at least I'm not bored, he muttered to himself. That night, unable to sleep in the too soft, too strange bed, Jackson explored his quarters. The technology was familiar yet foreign. Interfaces that responded to gestures, lighting that adjusted automatically to his movements, even a food synthesizer that produced approximations of human cuisine that were almost, but not quite, accurate. He found himself in a small study adjoining the bedroom, where a console displayed what appeared to be a collection of historical texts. Curious, he began browsing, hoping to learn more about the Azuri and their mysterious laws. Hours later, he was deep in research when a sound at the doorway made him look up. Keldara stood there, her formal regalia replaced by simpler attire, a flowing robe in deep blues that complemented her skin. Her hair, earlier bound in an elaborate style, now fell loose around her shoulders. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked, entering without waiting for an invitation. Jackson shook his head, trying to understand your world a bit better. He gestured to the console. "The law of the Lumira has quite a history. Our most sacred tradition," Keldara agreed, moving to stand beside him, looking at the text displayed. "It has given us strength when we might otherwise have fallen. New blood, new ideas, new adaptations." "I read about the last consort," Jackson said, "a trader from a world called Nebulan. She helped revolutionize your agricultural systems." Keldara nodded. "Liera. She was my great-grandmother's consort. Her innovations saved us from famine during the Great Drought." Jackson scrolled through more text. "And before that, a warrior from Tarsus who helped defend against an invasion. Before that, a scientist who cured a plague." He looked up at Keldara. "You're right. It's not just about genetics. It's about bringing in outside perspectives." "Yes," Keldara said simply. "Azura has stood for millennia because we know when to adapt, when to incorporate new strengths." She paused, studying him. "A former combat medic who became a smuggler to survive. You have seen much of the galaxy, Jackson. Experienced both war and peace, both order and chaos. Such perspective could be valuable to Azura." Jackson leaned back in his chair. "I'm flattered, but I'm still not convinced I'm royal consort material. I'm just a guy who tried to save a life." "Sometimes that is enough," Keldara replied. She seemed about to say more when her communication device chimed. She checked it, her expression growing serious. "The council has moved up our meeting. They convene in 1 hour." "In the middle of the night?" Jackson asked, suspicious. "It is unusual," Keldara acknowledged. "I must prepare. You should do the same. Formal attire has been provided in your wardrobe." As she turned to leave, Jackson called after her. "Keldara, what's really going on here? Who's trying to kill Lumira? And why the urgency from the council?" Keldara paused at the doorway, her silhouette framed against the dimly lit corridor beyond. "Politics on Azura can be complicated. As for who is behind the attack on Lumira, I have my suspicions." Her voice hardened. "But until I have proof, I must tread carefully. The stakes are too high for error." With that cryptic statement, she was gone, leaving Jackson with more questions than answers. He dressed quickly in the formal attire, a high-collar jacket in the royal blue with those same crimson accents that matched the Azuri markings. As he was fastening the unfamiliar closures, the door chimed. Commander Thora entered, her expression even more grim than usual. "I'm to escort you to the council chamber," she announced. "What's happening, Thora?" Jackson asked as they walked briskly through the palace corridors, Lumira padding along beside them. "Why the middle of the night meeting?" Thora's jaw tightened. Velik called for an emergency session to address the human situation. He's gathered his allies. And that's bad. Velik has been chief counselor for decades, Thora explained in a low voice. He's powerful, connected, and he was next in line for the regency if Keldara had died without an heir. Your arrival complicates his plans. So he wants me gone, Jackson concluded. That would be the optimistic interpretation, Thora replied darkly. They reached a set of massive doors carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story Jackson couldn't quite decipher. Royal guards stood at attention, their armor similar to Thora's but more elaborate. The doors swung open, revealing a vast circular chamber. Stepped seating surrounded a central floor where Caldara already stood, regal in formal attire that glittered with what looked like liquid starlight. Azuri counselors filled the seats, their markings glowing in the dim light. Thora led Jackson to stand beside Caldara. Lumira took his place at her other side. The emergency session of the Royal Council is now in session, announced an elderly Azuri from a raised platform. Chief Counselor Velik has called this meeting to address the matter of the human claiming the title of Royal Consort-elect. Velik rose from his seat, his tall form imposing as he moved to the center of the floor opposite Caldara. Your Majesty, honored counselors, he began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. We face an unprecedented situation. For the first time in our history, a human claims the sacred position of royal consort. He does not claim it, Caldara interrupted coolly. The law of the Lumira has bestowed it upon him. He saved Lumira's life, and therefore mine. So you say, Vela countered. But what proof do we have that this human actually saved the sacred beast? Only your word, your majesty, and that of the human himself. A murmur ran through the council chamber. Are you questioning your queen's word, Velik? Thora asked sharply from beside Jackson. I am questioning the convenience of this situation, Velik replied. A human appears, claiming to have saved Lumira, and immediately becomes royal consort-elect, gaining access to our most sacred traditions, our royal bloodline. He turned to address the council directly. For millennia, we have preserved the purity of Azura. Yes, we have accepted consorts from other worlds, but always from species compatible with our own. Never from a world as primitive, as chaotic as Earth. Jackson felt anger rising within him, but maintained his composure, watching Caldara instead. Her face remained impassive, but her markings pulsed rapidly. The law of the Lumira does not specify which species may become consort, Caldara stated. It only requires that the Saviour be honored. Would you have us abandon our most sacred tradition, Velik? Break the very laws that have sustained our civilization? I would have us interpret those laws with wisdom and caution, Velik countered. I propose that before this human is accepted as royal consort, he must prove his worth through the trial of combat, as our ancient laws allow when a consort's suitability is questioned. Another murmur, louder this time, swept through the chamber. The trial of combat has not been invoked for 7 generations, the elderly announcer noted. These are unprecedented times, Velik replied. If the human truly is worthy to be royal consort, let him prove it according to our traditions. Caldara's eyes narrowed. You challenge his right directly, then? I do, Velik confirmed, as is my right as chief counselor. All eyes turned to Jackson, who stood bewildered at this new development. The human may select a champion to fight in his place, Velik added, his tone suggesting he expected Jackson to cower behind another. Jackson stepped forward before Caldara could speak. I don't need a champion, he said clearly. I'll fight my own battles. The council chamber erupted in surprised voices. Even Caldara looked startled. Then it is decided, the elderly announcer declared. The trial of combat will take place at the next rising of the greater moon. Chief Counselor Velik has challenged, and the human Jackson has accepted. Let preparations begin. As the council dispersed, Caldara pulled Jackson aside, her expression a mixture of admiration and concern. That was either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, Jackson admitted. What exactly did I just agree to? The trial of combat is an ancient tradition, Caldara explained as they walked rapidly back toward the royal wing. A ritual duel to prove a consort's worth. It hasn't been used in generations because it's considered archaic. And what are the rules of this duel? Jackson asked, already suspecting the answer. Combat continues until one participant yields or is unable to continue, Caldara replied carefully. So, I just agreed to fight your chief counselor to the death. Velik is unlikely to kill you, Thora interjected from behind them. Too messy politically. He'll just defeat you thoroughly enough to invalidate your claim to being consort. Oh, well, that's comforting, Jackson muttered. And what happens if, when I lose? Keldara's expression darkened. Then you'll be exiled from Azura. And I. She hesitated. Without a consort confirmed by the law of the Lumira, my position becomes vulnerable. Velik and his allies could push for my abdication, claiming I'm weakened by the broken bond with Lumira, leading to the civil war you mentioned, Jackson concluded. Keldara nodded grimly. Now you understand the stakes. They reached the royal wing, where Keldara dismissed the guards to speak privately. You've placed yourself in great danger, Jackson, she said once they were alone. Velik is a skilled warrior, trained in our combat arts since childhood. I didn't have much choice, Jackson replied. He was challenging my right to be here, and I'm not going to hide behind someone else. Keldara studied him with those penetrating violet eyes. No, I don't believe you would. Her markings pulsed slowly, thoughtfully. There is still time before the trial. Thora can train you in the basics of Azuri combat. Will it be enough? Probably not, Thora answered bluntly from the doorway. But it's better than nothing. Lumira padded over to Jackson, bumping his massive head against Jackson's hand in what seemed like a gesture of solidarity. At least someone believes in me, Jackson said with a weak smile, scratching behind Lumira's ears. We don't have much time, Thora continued. The training starts now. Change into something you can move in and meet me in the lower courtyard in 10 minutes. As Thora departed, Keldara moved closer to Jackson. There's something else you should know, she said, her voice low. The attempt on Lumira's life. I believe Velik may have been involved. Jackson's eyes widened. You think he tried to kill Lumira? To kill you. I have no proof, Keldara replied, but the timing is suspicious. Velik has been pushing for more isolationist policies, opposing my efforts to form alliances with other worlds. With me gone, he would have become regent until a distant cousin of royal blood could be installed as a puppet ruler. And now I've agreed to fight him one-on-one, Jackson said grimly. Wonderful. I wouldn't have asked this of you, Keldara said softly. But now that you've accepted the challenge, I'll just have to win, Jackson finished for her. No pressure. For the next day, Thora worked Jackson relentlessly, teaching him the basics of Azuri combat. Their fighting style was fluid, relying more on redirection of energy than brute force. Jackson's military training gave him some foundation, but Azuri techniques were entirely different from what he'd learned. You're telegraphing your movements, Thora criticized after knocking him to the mat for the dozenth time. Your eyes reveal your intentions before your body moves. Jackson picked himself up, wiping sweat from his brow. In human combat, we're taught to watch our opponent's eyes. Azuri fighters are trained to use that against you, Thora explained. Watch the center of mass instead. The shoulders, the hips, they cannot move without revealing the true direction of attack. They continued for hours, breaking only when Jackson was too exhausted to stand. As he collapsed onto a bench, gulping water, Thora sat beside him. Why did you really accept Velik's challenge? She asked abruptly. You could have chosen champion. I would have fought for you. Jackson was silent for a moment, considering. Where I come from, we have a saying, if something's worth having, it's worth fighting for. And Keldara is worth fighting for. Thora's tone was neutral, but her eyes were shrewd. I barely know her, Jackson replied, but I know I don't want to be the cause of civil war. And he hesitated. I've spent the last 3 years running. Maybe it's time I stood my ground for once. Thora nodded slowly. Perhaps there is hope for you yet, human. She stood, extending a hand to help him up. Now, let's work on your defensive posture. As the training continued, Jackson found himself occasionally distracted by glimpses of Keldara watching from a balcony overlooking the courtyard. Their eyes would meet briefly before she withdrew, her expression unreadable. That evening, exhausted and sore in muscles he didn't know he had, Jackson returned to his quarters to find Lumira waiting for him. The creature led him to the study, where a hidden door stood open, revealing a passage he hadn't noticed before. Curious, Jackson followed Lumira through the passage into what appeared to be a security monitoring room. Screens displayed various areas of the palace, including the council chamber. On one screen, he saw Velik in what appeared to be a private meeting with two other Azuri, and Jackson's blood ran cold. A figure he recognized as a representative of the Corporate Alliance, a notorious consortium that exploited resources across the galaxy with little regard for local populations or laws. There was no audio, but the conversation appeared heated. Velik gestured emphatically while the Corporate Alliance representative remained calm, occasionally referring to a datapad. "What am I looking at, Lumira?" Jackson murmured. As if in answer, the creature brushed against a control panel, and one of the screens changed to display data files. Jackson couldn't read the Azuri script, but the Corporate Alliance logo was unmistakable, as were the geological survey maps of what appeared to be Azure itself. "They're after your resources," Jackson realized, "and Velik is helping them." Lumira made a low growling sound that Jackson took as confirmation. "I need to tell Caldara," he said, turning to leave, only to find her standing in the doorway. "I see Lumira has decided to trust you with our surveillance system," she said, entering the room. "Did you know about this?" Jackson asked, gesturing to the screen showing Velik's meeting. "I suspected," Caldara replied, moving to stand beside him. "But suspicion is not proof, and accusations without evidence would only strengthen Velik's position." She studied the screens. "This, however, might be enough to act upon." "He's selling out your planet," Jackson said, anger rising within him. "No wonder he wants me gone. He needs you isolated and vulnerable. The Corporate Alliance has been trying to gain access to our Triumph deposits for decades," Caldara explained. "It's an element rare in this sector, crucial for certain advanced technologies. We've always refused exploitation rights. So they decided to change the leadership to someone more accommodating," Jackson concluded. Caldara nodded grimly. "With me dead or deposed, and a puppet ruler in my place, they would have free reign." She turned to face him directly. "Now, do you understand why the law of the Lumira is so important? Why I cannot simply let you leave?" Before Jackson could respond, an alarm sounded throughout the palace. Security screens flashed red, showing armed figures moving through a lower level. "We're under attack," Caldara said, her voice tense but controlled. She activated a communication device. "Thora, status report." "Intruders in the East Wing," Thora's voice replied. "Appear to be mercenaries. Security forces engaging. Secure the council chamber and protect the counselors," Caldara ordered. "I'm going to the safe room." She turned to Jackson. "You should come with me. If this is Velik's doing, he might be targeting me to invalidate my claim before the trial." Jackson finished. "Clever." They moved quickly through hidden passages within the palace walls, Lumira leading the way. Twice they had to stop as sounds of fighting echoed nearby. "If Velik is behind this, he's more desperate than I thought," Caldara whispered as they waited for the sounds to fade. "To bring mercenaries into the palace itself. Or maybe the Corporate Alliance is getting impatient," Jackson suggested. "They might have decided to take matters into their own hands." They were nearing what Caldara had called the safe room when three armed figures appeared at the end of the corridor ahead. Not Azuri, but mercenaries in generic combat gear, the kind of hired guns Jackson had seen all too often during his smuggling days. Before either of them could react, Lumira sprang forward with surprising speed for his size, tackling the lead mercenary. The other two raised their weapons, but Jackson was already moving, using the techniques Thora had drilled into him. He deflected the first mercenary's aim, sending a plasma bolt into the wall instead of Caldara. The second managed to graze Jackson's arm before Caldara herself joined the fight, moving with a grace and precision that made Jackson's recent training look clumsy by comparison. In seconds, it was over. Two mercenaries unconscious, the third pinned beneath Lumira's massive paws. "You're injured," Caldara noted, examining the burn on Jackson's arm. "It's nothing," he replied, trying to ignore the searing pain. "I've had worse." Caldara tore a strip from her royal garment, binding the wound with practiced ease. "For someone who claims not to want to be involved in our politics, you fight quite effectively on our behalf." Old habits, Jackson said with a pained smile. Protect the patient, remember? They reached the safe room, a fortified chamber with its own life support and communication systems. Once inside, with the door sealed, Keldara activated the security monitors, revealing scenes of fighting throughout parts of the palace. Thora, she called through the communication system. Status. We've contained most of the intruders, Thora's voice replied. But Velik is nowhere to be found. And the council? Secure, but in disarray. They're demanding explanations. Keldara's expression hardened. Tell them I will address them once the situation is secure. She cut the communication, turning to Jackson. This changes everything. If we can prove Velik's involvement with the corporate alliance in this attack, would it be enough to cancel the trial? Jackson asked. No, Keldara replied. The challenge has been issued and accepted. According to our laws, it must proceed unless Velik himself withdraws it, which he won't do if he thinks he can win, Jackson concluded grimly. Precisely. Keldara studied him for a moment. Why did you protect me just now? You could have used the distraction to escape. Jackson looked at her in genuine surprise. Escape never crossed my mind, he admitted. I just reacted. Doctor's instinct, soldier's training, I don't know. Something shifted in Keldara's expression, a softening, perhaps, or a new awareness. You are an unusual human, Jackson. I get that a lot, he replied with a wry smile. They remained in the safe room for hours as Thora's forces secured the palace. Jackson used the time to study more of the Azuri combat techniques through instructional displays Keldara accessed for him. She watched him practice the movements, occasionally offering corrections. You learn quickly, she observed. Necessity is a powerful motivator, Jackson replied. Still don't think it'll be enough against someone with a lifetime of training, though. Perhaps not by strength alone, Keldara agreed. But combat is not merely about physical prowess. It is about will, about heart. She placed a hand over her chest, where her markings pulsed with her heartbeat. The Azuri believe that in true combat, it is not simply body against body, but spirit against spirit. That's poetic, Jackson said, but Velik will still have the advantage. Yes, Keldara acknowledged. Unless. She fell silent, her expression thoughtful. Unless what? Jackson prompted. Before she could answer, the communication system activated. Thora's face appeared on the screen. The palace is secure, she reported. 17 intruders captured, 9 dead. 3 of our guards wounded, none critically. And Velik? Keldara asked. Still missing, Thora replied. But we found something in his private chambers, communications with the corporate alliance going back months. Evidence, Keldara breathed. Enough to convict him of treason? Possibly, Thora said. But until we find him, continue the search, Keldara ordered, and prepare the council chamber. I will address them immediately. As the communication ended, Keldara turned to Jackson. It seems our situation has become even more complicated. Story of my life, Jackson muttered. The council session was tense, with Azuri nobles still shaken from the unprecedented attack on the palace. Keldara presented the evidence against Velik, the communications with the corporate alliance, the geological surveys of Azura's Triumph deposits, records of payments to mercenary groups. In light of these discoveries, I move that Velik be declared a traitor to Azura, Keldara concluded, and that the trial of combat be suspended pending his capture and trial. Murmurs ran through the council. The elderly announcer, who Jackson now knew was named Centaur, cleared his throat. While the evidence against Chief Counselor Velik is troubling, the trial of combat has been formally challenged and accepted, he stated. Our ancient laws are clear. Once invoked, the trial must proceed at the appointed time. The challenge party is still present, another counselor pointed out, indicating Jackson. But the challenger has fled. How can the trial proceed? The law provides for such circumstances, Centaur replied. If the challenger is unable to participate, they may name a champion to act in their stead. If they do not, the council may appoint one. This is absurd, Thora objected. We have evidence that Velik committed treason. The trial itself was likely part of his plot. The law is the law, Centaur insisted. Unless the human Jackson withdraws his acceptance of the challenge, in which case, by our traditions, he forfeits his claim to the position of royal consort. All eyes turned to Jackson. He understood the choice being presented. Withdraw, return to his former life, and leave Caldara to face the political chaos that would follow, or proceed with a trial against an unknown opponent who would almost certainly be chosen to ensure his defeat. Jackson glanced at Caldara, whose expression remained carefully neutral despite the intensity in her eyes. He thought of everything he'd learned about Azura, about the law of the Lumara, about the precarious position Caldara would be in without a consort. He thought of Lumara, who had trusted him enough to reveal Vielic's treachery. "I will not withdraw," Jackson declared, his voice firm. "Let the trial proceed as scheduled." Relief flashed briefly across Caldara's face before her regal mask returned. "Very well," Centaur announced. "In the absence of Chief Counselor Vielic, the Council will select a champion to represent his challenge." A slender Azuri female rose from among the Council. "I nominate Commander Varys of the Elite Guard to serve as champion." Jackson saw Thora's expression tighten at the name. "Commander Varys is accepted as champion," Centaur declared. "The trial of combat will proceed at the rising of the greater moon, as originally scheduled." As the Council dispersed, Jackson turned to Thora. "Commander Varys, friend of yours?" "The opposite," Thora replied grimly. "Varys is Vielic's protege, one of our most skilled fighters and completely loyal to him. So the Council just ensured I'll face the toughest opponent possible," Jackson concluded. "Yes," Thora agreed, "but at least now we know what we're facing. Come, we have work to do before tomorrow." That night, as Jackson continued training with Thora, pushing his body past exhaustion, Caldara visited the training grounds. She dismissed Thora with a gesture and approached Jackson, who was practicing a complex defensive sequence. "You could have withdrawn," she said without preamble. "Return to your ship, to your former life." Jackson completed the sequence before answering. "I could have, but I didn't." "Why?" Jackson considered the question seriously. "At first, I just wanted to do the right thing. Save Lumara, help you stabilize your position. But now," he gestured around them, "at the palace, at Azura beyond, I've seen what's at stake. If the corporate alliance gains control here, through Vielic or anyone else, they'll strip this world bare. I've seen it happen before." Caldara studied him with those penetrating violet eyes. "So you fight for Azura now?" "I fight because it's the right thing to do," Jackson replied simply. "And because—" He hesitated. "Because—" Caldara prompted softly. "Because in the short time I've been here, I've come to care what happens to you," Jackson admitted. "To you, to Lumara, to this world." Something shifted in Caldara's expression, a vulnerability beneath the regal facade. She stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face with slender blue fingers. "In our history," she said, her voice low, "the law of the Lumara has brought many consorts to our world. Some came unwillingly, as you did. But the ones remembered most fondly in our songs and stories are those who chose to embrace their destiny, who fought not because they were forced to, but because they believed in what they were fighting for." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, leaving a trail of warmth that seemed to sink beneath his skin. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Jackson, know that you have already earned a place in Azuri history. And in my gratitude." Before Jackson could respond, Caldara withdrew her hand and stepped back, her regal composure returning. "Rest now. Tomorrow will require all your strength." As she turned to leave, Lumara emerged from the shadows where he had been watching. The creature padded over to Jackson, then looked back at Caldara, making a soft chirping sound. Caldara paused, her expression softening as she met Lumara's gaze. Something seemed to pass between them, a silent communication that Jackson couldn't interpret. "It seems Lumara wishes to stay with you tonight," Caldara said. "He has not left my side since he was a cub. I find that significant." With those enigmatic words, she departed, leaving Jackson alone with the massive creature. "Well, buddy," Jackson said, scratching Lumara behind the ears, "at least one of us is optimistic about tomorrow." Lumara's only response was a deep, rumbling purr. The day of the trial dawned with Azura's 3 moons still visible in the morning sky. The greater moon, the object that would signal the beginning of the combat, hanging full and heavy on the horizon. Jackson had slept surprisingly well, with Lumira's warm bulk nearby. He rose, went through stretching exercises Thora had taught him, and dressed in the combat attire provided, a flexible bodysuit that allowed freedom of movement while providing minimal protection. A knock at his door revealed Thora, already in her formal uniform as commander of the Royal Guard. "It's time," she said simply. The trial would take place in the ancient combat arena, a circular space within the palace grounds, surrounded by tiered seating that was already filling with Azuri nobles and officials. At the center of the arena stood a raised platform of polished stone, its surface marked with intricate patterns that Jackson now recognized as representations of the Azuri royal lineage. As Jackson was led to a preparation chamber beneath the arena, he was surprised to find Keldara waiting. She wore her full royal regalia, a flowing gown of that same liquid metal material as Lumira's collar, her markings emphasized with some kind of luminescent paint or ink that made them seem to pulse with their own light. "Your Majesty," Thora said, bowing deeply. "Protocol dictates that you should not be here." "Protocol can make an exception," Keldara replied, her eyes never leaving Jackson. "Leave us, Thora. I would speak with the royal consort-elect alone." Once Thora had departed, Keldara approached Jackson. "Are you prepared?" "As much as I can be," he replied honestly. "Varys is the best fighter on Azura, according to Thora." "One of the best," Keldara corrected. "But skill alone does not determine the outcome of the trial." She reached out, placing both hands on his chest, over his heart. "The trial of combat is not merely physical. It is spiritual. The connection between a ruler and their consort must be strong enough to withstand any challenge." Her markings began to pulse more rapidly, glowing brighter. Jackson felt a strange warmth spreading from her touch, flowing through his body. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Strengthening our connection," Keldara replied. "As queen, I am bound to Lumira, and now, through him, to you. This is not something usually done before the trial. It is meant to come after. But these are not usual circumstances." The warmth intensified, and Jackson felt something else, a presence at the edge of his consciousness, familiar yet alien. Images flashed through his mind. Lumira as a cub, playful and bright. Keldara as a child, learning the ways of rulership. Moments of joy, of sorrow, of determination shared between Queen and Lumira. When Keldara finally withdrew her hands, Jackson felt different. More aware, more connected to something larger than himself. "What was that?" he asked. "A sharing," Keldara said simply. "Normally, it would take months for a bond like this to form naturally. But time is a luxury we do not have." She met his eyes directly. "During the trial, listen not just with your ears, see not just with your eyes. The bond will guide you if you let it." Before Jackson could ask for clarification, a gong sounded above, signaling that the time was approaching. "I must take my place," Keldara said, moving toward the door. She paused, looking back at him. "Jackson, thank you. Whatever happens today, know that you have done more for Azura than most who were born to this world." With that, she was gone, leaving Jackson to contemplate what had just happened. He had little time to dwell on it, however, as Thora returned to escort him to the arena. As Jackson emerged onto the combat platform, the crowd fell silent. Across from him stood Commander Varys, tall even for an Azuri, with markings that seemed sharper, more angular than those of the royal house. He wore the same style of combat attire as Jackson, but moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering his body as a weapon. Above the arena, on a royal balcony, sat Keldara with Lumira at her side. The other council members were arranged in order of rank, with the elderly centaur serving as officiant. "The trial of combat now commences," Centaur announced, his voice amplified to reach all corners of the arena. "Commander Varys stands as champion for the challenge issued by Chief Counselor Velik, currently absent. Jackson of Earth stands to defend his claim as royal consort-elect under the law of the Lumira. Assistants approached, offering each combatant their choice from a selection of traditional Azuri weapons. Varys selected a staff with bladed ends, a weapon that could be used for striking, cutting, or thrusting. Jackson, following Thora's advice, chose a shorter, curved blade that would allow him to get inside the reach of Varys' staff. The trial continues until one combatant yields or is unable to continue, Centaur explained. Deliberate killing blows are forbidden, but accidents. He left the implication hanging. When the greater moon fully clears the horizon, the combat will begin. Jackson and Varys faced each other, weapons at the ready. In the tense silence, Jackson could hear his own heartbeat, and, strangely, what seemed like an echo of another, faster heartbeat beneath it. He glanced up at Caldara, whose markings pulsed visibly even from a distance. "The bond will guide you, if you let it," she had said. The greater moon cleared the horizon. A gong sounded, and Varys attacked immediately, his staff a blur of motion. Jackson barely had time to parry the first strike before having to dodge the second. The Azuri was fast, faster than Thora had been during their training. For the first minutes of the combat, Jackson was entirely defensive, using everything Thora had taught him just to avoid being struck. The curved blade deflected what it could, but more than once, Varys' staff slipped past his guard, striking glancing blows that would bruise later. The crowd watched in near silence. The only sounds the clash of weapons and the combatants' controlled breathing. Jackson felt his arms growing heavy, his reactions slowing. If this continued, Varys would wear him down through superior skill and endurance. Then, in a moment of clarity, Jackson remembered Caldara's words. He closed his eyes briefly, a dangerous move in combat, but something compelled him to try, and reached out with his senses to that echo of another heartbeat he'd felt earlier. Suddenly, he was aware of more than just Varys' physical presence. He could sense the Azuri's intentions, the subtle shifts in balance that preceded each attack, the minute adjustments of grip that telegraphed which end of the staff would strike next. When Jackson opened his eyes again, the combat changed. He began to anticipate Varys' movements, parrying with greater precision, finding openings that hadn't been apparent before. The crowd silence gave way to murmurs of surprise as the human began to fight back effectively against one of Azura's elite warriors. Varys' confidence faltered, his attacks becoming more aggressive, less controlled. Jackson recognized the pattern. He'd seen it in soldiers during the war, that moment when frustration overtook training. Using a technique Thora had demonstrated, one that used an opponent's momentum against them, Jackson sidestepped a powerful thrust, caught Varys' staff with his free hand, and used the Azuri's own motion to throw him off balance. As Varys stumbled forward, Jackson's blade came to rest against the side of his neck. The arena fell silent. "Yield," Jackson said quietly. Varys' markings pulsed with what Jackson now recognized as anger and shame. For a moment, it seemed the Azuri might refuse, might try to continue the fight regardless of his position. "Commander Varys," Caldara's voice rang out from the royal balcony, "you have fought with honor. There is no disgrace in yielding to a worthy opponent." Something in her tone seemed to reach Varys. His posture relaxed slightly, and he lowered his staff. "I yield," he said, loudly enough for all to hear. Another gong sounded, signaling the end of the trial. "The combat is concluded," Centaur announced. "Jackson of Earth has prevailed. By the law of the Lumira and the traditions of the trial of combat, his claim as royal consort-elect is confirmed." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some applause, some murmurs of discontent, most simply stunned silence at the unexpected outcome. Jackson barely noticed, his attention focused on Caldara, whose expression was one of profound relief, and something else, something that made his heart beat faster in response. The victory ceremony was brief. Jackson knelt before Caldara in the council chamber as she placed around his neck a pendant similar to Lumira's collar, a band of liquid metal embedded with stones that captured the light of Azura's suns. "Rise, royal consort Jackson," Caldara proclaimed. bound to the throne of Azura by the law of the Lumira, protector of the royal bloodline, advisor to the queen. As he rose, the council members bowed in acknowledgement, some more deeply than others, but all recognizing his new status. The celebrations that followed were interrupted by urgent news. Velik had been captured trying to leave Azura in a corporate alliance vessel. With him were data cores containing detailed plans for the exploitation of Azura's Triumph deposits and the gradual replacement of the royal government with corporate alliance proxies. The evidence was overwhelming. In an emergency session, the council stripped Velik of his titles and positions, condemning him to exile, the traditional punishment for treason against the crown. His co-conspirators within the Azuri government were identified and removed from power, creating opportunities for reformers who shared Keldara's vision of a more open, connected Azura. Throughout these political upheavals, Jackson remained at Keldara's side, offering perspective from his experiences across the galaxy. His medical knowledge proved valuable in improving Azuri healthcare systems, while his familiarity with smuggling routes and criminal organizations helped strengthen security against further corporate alliance incursions. One evening, months after the trial, Jackson stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city, watching as Azura's 3 moons rose into the night sky. Lumira lounged nearby, his condition fully restored, his markings glowing with contentment. Footsteps behind him announced Keldara's arrival. She had dispensed with the formal regalia of earlier times, adopting simpler attire when not engaged in official functions, a change that reflected broader reforms throughout Azuri society. The Council has approved the alliance with the Terran Federation, she announced, joining him at the balcony rail. The first formal diplomatic relationship between Azura and Earth. Never thought I'd be involved in interplanetary diplomacy, Jackson commented. Especially not as the spouse of an alien queen. Consort, Keldara corrected with a smile. Though I understand the terms may be semantically similar in human culture. Close enough, Jackson agreed. Either way, it's a long way from smuggling medical supplies past Imperial checkpoints. Do you regret it? Keldara asked, studying his profile against the moonlight. The path that brought you here? Jackson considered the question seriously. I regret not having a choice at the beginning, he admitted. But knowing what I know now, seeing what we've accomplished together, he turned to face her. No, I don't regret where I've ended up. Keldara's markings pulsed with emotion, visible now to Jackson through their strengthened bond as pleasure, affection, and something deeper that had grown between them over the months. The law of the Lumira has brought many consorts to Azura throughout our history, she said, moving closer. But none quite like you. Is that a compliment or a complaint? Jackson asked with a smile. Definitely a compliment, Keldara replied, her fingers tracing the line of the pendant he wore, the symbol of his position, of their connection. Our ancestors created the law to ensure the survival of our people. They could not have foreseen how perfectly it would work in our case. From the gardens below came the sound of youthful chirping. They looked down to see 2 young Lumira cubs, the firstborn on Azura in decades, chasing each other through ornamental plants, their markings glowing faintly in the moonlight. Lumira, whom Jackson now knew was properly called Lumira, being the name of the species rather than the individual, watched his offspring with obvious pride. New life, Keldara murmured. New beginnings. For them, for us, for Azura. Jackson put his arm around her waist, drawing her closer. The motion felt natural now, the warmth of their connection a constant presence in his mind. When I first came here, he said, you told me that my fate was bound to yours, for better or worse. And so it has proven to be, Keldara agreed. I think, Jackson said, watching the young Lumira cubs play under 3 alien moons, it's turning out to be for the better. Keldara's hand found his, their fingers intertwining, blue against tan, alien against human. The differences visible, but the connection transcending them. For the better, she echoed softly, and for always. As they stood together on the balcony, the former smuggler and the alien queen, with Sahal watching over his cubs below, Jackson reflected on the strange path that had led him here. A random cargo, a poisoned sacred beast, an ancient law that had seemed like a trap, all converging to create a future he could never have imagined, but now couldn't imagine being without. The law of Illumera had brought him to Azura against his will, but he would stay by choice, bound not by law but by something much stronger, a connection that spanned worlds and species, a bond forged in combat and strengthened by shared purpose. For Jackson, former combat medic turned smuggler turned royal consort, the journey had been unexpected. But as Keldura leaned against him beneath the light of 3 moons, he knew with absolute certainty that it had led exactly where he was meant to be.